Welcome back to the Pacino Perspective. I am your host, and you know who I am. Now listen to me, listen up, because this is important. This is the blood and guts of the matter. You gotta be here with me. You gotta be a part of this. Hit that little red button, subscribe to the damn channel, okay? Don't be a spectator to the end of the world. Be an informed witness so you can tell the grandkids you were there when the whole thing turned to smoke. Get on it. Do it now. We got bigger things to talk about, things that'll make your head spin off its axis, you understand? The analysis, the deep dive, the reality of the situation, the cold stone fact, is that Trump's whole beef with NATO, it's not about strategy, it's not about geopolitical chess. No. It's about money. It's about the tab. It's always about the tab, isn't it? He looks at Article 5, that beautiful Article 5, where an attack on one is an attack on all, a beautiful, high-minded, noble piece of work. He looks at that, and he doesn't see collective defense. He sees a bunch of deadbeats stiffing the greatest country in the world for the biggest security bill in history. He sees a sweetheart deal that Uncle Sucker has been paying for since 1949, since the ashes of the war were still warm, since Truman put his foot down and said, "No more Soviet expansion, not on my watch." It was about deterring the Russians, sure, but it was also about chaining Germany to the Western project, keeping the nationalist demons locked up in the basement, and encouraging that whole European idea, that integration. It was a masterpiece of statecraft, the whole damn thing. And what does Trump do? He calls them weak. He calls them delinquents. He says the whole deal is obsolete, which is a word that should send shivers down your spine, because obsolete means you don't need it anymore. It means it's garbage. He's got a point, a small, tiny point in the mountain of noise he makes, because for years, for decades, Europe has been dragging its feet on that 2% of GDP defense spending commitment. They promised it at The Hague. They promised it before. They promised it to every president since Bush, and they keep falling short. Why? Because they got the U.S., they got the mighty, the all-powerful U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. nuclear umbrella, so why should they spend the money? They can build their beautiful social programs, their great health care, their little high-speed trains, all while America, the sucker, keeps the big bad wolf, Russia, a safe distance away. The Danish intelligence report, they even said that under this administration, the U.S. is using its economic power, its threats of tariffs, to assert its will, even against allies. The U.S. is threatening military force against friend and foe alike. Can you believe that? That's what the Danes are saying, and their allies, for Christ's sake. So Trump says, that's it, enough, game over, and he pulls the plug. He makes the move. He sends the memo. The whole establishment, the generals, the diplomats, the think tank clowns, even a big chunk of his own party in Congress, they're all screaming. They're tearing their hair out, because this isn't just a treaty. This is the very architecture of Western power. This is the thing that kept the peace, more or less, since the Cold War began. You kill NATO, you got a security vacuum the size of a continent. And vacuums, my friends, they don't stay empty for long. They get filled. They get filled by people who don't like you. They get filled by chaos. It's a moment of pure, unadulterated peril. And the Europeans, they feel it in their gut, that deep, cold feeling of being exposed, of being alone in the dark. And this is where the new script starts. This is where Europe, which is supposed to be weak, which is supposed to be the declining power facing civilizational erasure according to Trump's own national security strategy, which is a document more critical of Europe than of Russia, which is just bananas. It's completely insane. This is where Europe signs a deal that changes everything. What is this deal? You gotta understand the pressure they were under. They got Russia, emboldened, feeling good, with a new U.S. strategy that treats Moscow with a conciliatory stance, that wants to re-establish strategic stability with Russia. Even if it means pressuring Ukraine to take a lousy peace deal, they got a U.S. president who's practically cheering on the far-right, anti-American populist parties in Europe, the AfD in Germany, the National Rally in France, talking about how he'll help Europe correct its current trajectory, which is code for regime change for the current centrist governments. It's a betrayal, a pure, cold-hearted diplomatic betrayal that makes your stomach turn. So, they get together. Not as NATO anymore, because the U.S. is out, or at least the U.S. is actively hostile to the alliance. They get together as the European Union, plus a few key players like the UK who realize they're in the soup too, a little island surrounded by a storm, and they sign it. They sign the New Deal, something with a clinical, boring name, like the Treaty of Common European Defense and Security, or the PESCO Enhancement Pact, something bureaucratic and dull. But the guts of it, the guts of the deal, that's where the bomb drops. They invoke something, some clause, some old idea that's been rattling around since the 50s, a kind of internal Article 5 for Europe, but they put teeth in it this time. They make it a real, absolute, ironclad, legally binding mutual defense guarantee, independent of the United States. They go all in. They put a collective pot of money on the table, money that finally meets and exceeds that 2% target, because now they have no choice. The gun is to their head, and they gotta start fighting back. They gotta start building. They say, fine, America doesn't want to lead? We'll lead ourselves. Think about the implications, my friend. Think about what this means. The money, first of all. We're talking about hundreds of billions of euros, maybe $1 trillion over a decade, poured into European defense contractors. The Financial Times already showed that European defense manufacturers are expanding at a rapid clip. Millions of square feet of new facilities breaking ground. Now you're talking about a full-scale industrial mobilization, a kind of European Manhattan Project for tanks, planes, cybersecurity, and most importantly, intelligence. Because the other shoe that dropped with the U.S. withdrawal was the intelligence sharing, the eyes and ears, the stuff you can't build in a day. The Europeans, they were always dependent on U.S. satellites, U.S. signals intelligence, the whole shebang. Now they gotta build their own. They gotta build a whole new shadow government of spies and analysts, their own damn CIA, their own NSA, but for Europe. This is a massive shift, a seismic event. And the military side, the hardware. This deal mandates a unified command structure, a real European military force. Not just a bunch of national armies playing dress-up. They have to decide whose general is in charge, which is a political nightmare, a pure bloodbath of egos and national pride, but they have to do it. They gotta create a CESUR, a Supreme Allied Commander Europe, that answers to Brussels, not to Washington. It's a political nightmare, but it's a necessity. The documents from Congress, the National Defense Authorization Act, they tried to stop the troop drawdowns. They mandated that the CESUR must be an American. But all that is just paper if the president decides to tear up the treaty, to really walk away. The Europeans know this. They know a future administration might undo what Trump did, but they can't bet their entire civilization on an election result across the ocean. No, they gotta have their own foundation, their own rock to stand on. And then there's the big one, the nuclear question. This is the elephant in the room, the thing that nobody wants to talk about, but which is the key to the whole thing. France has its own deterrent, the force de frappe, a small but real nuclear capability. But it's French, it's not European. The New Deal, the big deal that changes everything, it's gotta have a clause, a secret, terrifying handshake deal, where the French nuclear shield is extended, somehow, in some way, to protect the whole continent, or at least the countries that sign on the dotted line. This is a political third rail, a true lightning rod, because it means German money paying for French bombs. It means a huge shift in the power balance within Europe. And it scares the hell out of the Russians because now the line of deterrence is a lot blurrier and a lot more dangerous. The United States nuclear umbrella is folded up and put away, and now they got a French one, maybe a British one, in a parallel deal, and they're learning to stand in the rain. The internal politics of this, it's a masterpiece of tension. You got the Germans, the biggest wallet, always squeamish about military spending, suddenly being told to put their money where their mouth is, to rearm, to become a normal big power, and they're choking on it. You got the smaller countries, the Baltics, Poland, who are right on the front line with Russia. They're the ones who are happiest about the deal because they were terrified. They were shaking in their boots thinking, they left us. America left us to the wolves. Now they got a new defense guarantee, and they're demanding the bulk of the new military spending and troop deployments. It's an absolute political fight for the soul of Europe between the old, comfortable post-history continent and the new, hard-edged, survivalist Europe that knows its neighbor is an enemy. And what about America? The American reaction. Trump is going to say, "See, I told you. I saved billions. They finally paid their share. This is a win." He'll crow about it. He'll brag about it. He'll say he did in one move what every other president begged for over 70 years. But the people who understand power, the real power, they know the truth. They know that America just surrendered its greatest single tool of influence on the continent. The reason the U.S. had a seat at every table, the reason the U.S. could tell the Europeans what to do, the reason American foreign policy was the default position for the West, was NATO. It was that security umbrella. It was the absolute, total, unquestioned leadership. That's all gone now. When you're not the one paying for the security, you lose the right to demand anything. Europe becomes, for the first time since World War II, a genuinely independent geopolitical player. A rival to the United States, in some ways, certainly a competitor. The trade disagreements, the technology disputes, the issues with China, they're not just family squabbles anymore. They're the disputes between two great powers, two major poles on the world stage.
There's a whole constellation of conspiracy theories, too. You can't forget them, because people need an explanation for this kind of chaos. One story says this was the plan all along, a deep state plot, a Machiavellian chess move by the Europeans. They knew Trump would pull out, so they set the stage. They had the new treaty waiting in a drawer, ready to be signed the minute the ink was dry on the NATO cancellation. It's a clean break. A way for Europe to finally escape American dominance without having to start the fight themselves. They tricked Trump into doing what they wanted. Another one says it's all Russia, that Putin has been working on this for 20 years, the dissolution of NATO, the weakening of the West. And this is the endgame. And the new European Defense Pact is just a paper tiger, a bluff to save face while the continent prepares to cut a deal with Moscow.
They say this new deal is designed to fail in a crisis, to show the Europeans they really can't stand alone, and that'll pave the way for a grand accommodation with the Kremlin. You gotta listen to all of it. You gotta put it all on the table, because the truth, the real truth, it's usually somewhere in the terrifying middle. But the physical reality, the material reality of the New Deal is the most profound. They're remilitarizing Europe, but on their own terms. It's a fortress Europe. But this time it's not against the world. It's for their own protection. They're building up their own arms industry, their own supply chains. They're reducing their strategic dependencies on the United States, which is a big word for saying they can't afford to be caught naked again. They want to be able to look at Washington, look at Beijing, look at Moscow, and say, "We handle our own business now. We're a player. We're serious." The idea of Europe, the idea of a peaceful, prosperous union, has just been forced to take on a hard shell, a military exoskeleton, because the friendly giant who used to guard the gate has walked away. It's a tragedy, it's a necessary move, and it's the biggest geopolitical earthquake since the Berlin Wall came down. What happens next? The scramble. The global scramble for influence, because a united, well-armed, independent Europe, that is a whole new piece on the board, and every power, every damn power, has to adjust its whole strategy. The game is changed. It's not over. It's just getting a whole lot more dangerous, a whole lot more interesting. The uncertainty, the lack of a plan, that's the real risk. Europe had to make a plan, fast, or they were going to be hanging out there just waiting for the final slaughterhouse. Now you see this video right here, the one about the U.S. threatening a withdrawal. It speaks to the fear that was brewing, the fear that forced Europe's hand to sign that deal, that changed everything.